variables within the worklet, then you have to create those variables in that particular worklet alone. Okay. Right. So here, once you create a worklet, so if you create a worklet in a worklet designer, so now we are in worklet designer and we create it, right? So you can use this worklet. So you go to workflow, we simply drag this worklet. What is the message we are seeing? The current open workflow is read only and cannot be modified. So why we are getting this error?
Do we need to check out?
Yeah, correct. So yesterday we did a check-in, right? So that is the reason why we are getting. So now you do a checkout. So now you drag and drop the worklet, then it will have. So and then if you want, you can link as a task within the workflow. So now if you go to the worklet, and this is a reusable and standalone, right? If I right click and I try to start, so these options are disabled, right? So that means independent worklet, right? You cannot start the worklet or you cannot start any task within the worklet, right? So if you want to execute the worklets, then definitely you have to use those worklets within the workflow. So if you right click, then you can start the worklet. So if you are starting the worklet means what? You are starting the task within the worklet as per the dependencies. So if you want, you can open the worklet also. So if you right click, open worklet, it will open. So even in this case also it will not. So definitely you have to start the worklet from the workflow. Suppose let's assume I want to execute only this particular session within a worklet. So how will you do that? So because anyhow you cannot execute this particular session from a worklet. So you need to execute it within a workflow. So in this case, if I right click and start, it will start both the flows, right? This session task will be executed and this assignment task also will execute, and rest of the flows will continue. Suppose if you want to execute only these tasks, so in what case you can do that? How can you do that generally? See, now tell me, how can you execute? So if I want to execute only this session task which is there in the worklet, how will you do that? That you can do it in two ways, okay, right? So you can do it in two ways. If this particular workflow was executed by at least once, if it was executed by at least once, you can get that execution when it was executed in the workflow monitor, right? So you can go to workflow monitor and you can go to the worklet and then right click this particular task and then start. You got it, right? So you can get the previous runs also in the workflow. So right click here, open latest 20 runs. So it will give you the previous runs. So yesterday, so these many times it ran, right? So it will, because all the times you are executing, right, it will store that historical information. So when it was executed, those statistics and all. So you just need to get the latest runs, open latest 20 runs, and then you can go to the workflow monitor and then right click on that particular task in the worklet and then restart. That's it. That is one way of doing it. The other way is you need to use the command prompts. So in Informatica there is a PMCMD command. So using the PMCMD command, for the PMCMD command you can start or you can pass this particular session. So you need to pass the folder name, workflow name. I will show you that later in the last class. So folder name, workflow name, and worklet name, and within that worklet which task you want to execute. So it will directly execute that particular task alone within the worklet. So the other way is manually. So without GUI, so suppose if you didn't execute this workflow, at least once, right? If you didn't execute this at least once, right? So that means you didn't run this workflow at least once. Then in that case, you have to execute it manually through command prompt. So I will show it later in the last class. Okay, so that is where. So this is how you can create the reusable worklets and use it in the workflow. So generally, worklets are used to just reduce the complexity and set the dependencies in a easy manner. So that is one way. So if you want to create a non-reusable worklet, right? You have to be in the workflow designer. Within the workflow, you go to tasks and then select the worklet. So it creates the worklet. Done. So you link wherever you want. So if you want to execute this worklet after this worklet, then right click on the worklet and then edit or open worklet. So in this open worklet, again you can add the different tasks. If you want, you can create the different tasks and then use this particular worklet. So this worklet is specific to this workflow. You cannot use this worklet in any of the workflows. So then that is a non-reusable worklet. Right? So that is how you have to create the worklets and use the worklets. Any doubts? So any doubts for the worklet?
No.
Okay. So the same way we discussed about the worklet, right? So we have at a mapping level also we have a maplet. Okay, so the maplet. So the same way. So here, if you have a reusable logic, so within a mapping, if you have some reusable logic and you want to reuse that logic in a different mappings, right? So then in that case, what we can do is we can create the worklet. We can create the maplet with the reusable logic and then use that maplet within a different mapping. So for in case of maplet, right, you can create a reusable one only. You cannot create a non-reusable maplet. And the basic difference between the maplet and the mappings is, so in a mapping you have a target, right? Whereas in maplets you cannot keep the targets. So that is one thing. So let's see the differences and what are the drawbacks. So what you can use and what you cannot use within a maplet. So maplet is a reusable object that you can create in a maplet designer. So it will also contain the set of transformations and let you reuse the transformation logic in multiple mappings. So maplet helps simplify mappings in the following ways. So you can use the source definition. So that means you can directly have the source definition. You can have the source qualifiers and all. Accept data from sources in a mapping. So within a mapping, it accepts the data. So if you want to use the maplet within a mapping, right? So you can pass the data to the maplet. You can include multiple transformations within a maplet. So contain unused ports. So you do not have to connect all the maplet input and output ports in a mapping. So generally, maplet, right, whenever you want to create a maplet, right, you have to start with the maplet input transformation. You have to start with the maplet output transformation. And within the maplet input and output, you have to create the ports. So it's just the name of the port. So you don't need to mention any data types and all. This is how the maplet input and output transformations looks like. So there are some limitations for a maplet. So let's see that what are those limitations. So these are the limitations. If you use a sequence generator transformation, you must use a reusable sequence generator transformation. So if you are using in a maplet, if you want to use a sequence generator, it must be a reusable one. So, and if you are using a stored procedure, then it should be a normal stored procedure. So I will normal stored procedure means that stored procedure must be executed for each and every record. That is what it means normal. And you cannot include a normalizer transformation, you cannot include COBOL sources, you cannot include XML source qualifier, you cannot include target definitions, and you cannot include other maplets. So you cannot have nested maplets. All the reusable transformations and shortcut can be used. To protect the validity of the maplet, use a copy of the transformation instead. So these are the limitations actually. So if you are creating a maplet, make sure that you are not or you are following these rules. So okay, you have to use a reusable sequence generator and you have to use a normal stored procedure transformation. You cannot include normalizer transformation, COBOL, XML sources, and target definitions and other maplets. Suppose I want to create a maplet, and in that maplet I just want to have a reusable logic. Like suppose let's assume just increment the salary. So but the salary incrementation calculation of that, so you need to accept a percentage value. So how much percentage you want to increment? So if you want to increment a salary, what input you need to have? First of all, if you want to increment the salary, what data you should have?
Salary information.
Sorry?
Salary information of all employees.
Yeah, salary information. So what is the present salary of an employee and
percentage of how much
percentage, right? So how much percentage you want to increment the salary? So that means if you want to create a maplet, so that means it's a reusable logic. You want to make it as a reusable logic. So that means you need to create a maplet with two inputs, right? One is what is the salary and what is the increment. So how much percentage of increment you want to give. So if you have these two inputs, then you can create the maplet and then use it. So the maplet output it will have the same the increment, percentage increment, and the input salary and the increment salary. So you will have three outputs for the maplet, right? So now let's create a maplet. So here maplet it will start with a maplet input. So you have to go to transformations and then maplet input. Done. So you just go to ports tab and then create. So you just have the port names. So one is present salary. The other one is increment percentage. How much percentage you want to increment the salary? That's it. So after this, so that means if you want to increment the salary, where can you do that expression calculations and all? In which transformation? You have to use an expression transformation, right? So just pass these port names. So here you need to define what type of data types you want. So in percentage salary means what? Present salary. Present salary means obviously salary can be in decimal. So with two decimal places. This one also should be decimal, and the percentage it will be two decimal places, right? So now you need to create the variable port, variable increment salary. So create it as a decimal. So what you have to do, you need to present sal plus present sal into increment percentage. So how much percentage you want to increment? Right. This gives you the increment salary. Then you create an output port. So use this variable port in the pass this variable port as input to the output port. That's it. So now you just create the maplet output. So you just pass these ports as all these ports to output. So here in this case, if you want, you can remove this out. Save it. So now if you look at, you can see that maplet here. So if you want to use this maplet, so create a mapping. So have a source qualifier. Right, and use this maplet. So simply you need to drag and drop the maplet here. So see here the maplet here, if you drag and drop, this is the input and this is the output. So present salary, this is the one. So if you want to pass the increment percentage, so how will you pass it? So you need to have an expression, right?
Yeah.
So create an output port. So it should be a decimal. So it's 0.2. So pass all these ports as input to the expression. So from the expression, you pass the increment percentage. So present salary. And then you directly connect the data to the target. So employee number, e-name, job, MGR, high date. You directly connect here. So and how will you define whether a maplet is an active or passive? So once you are connecting the salary, you need to connect the increment salary from the maplet. And then commissioning department. So how will you know whether a maplet is an active or passive? In this case, in this maplet, whether it's an active maplet or passive maplet.
It's not doing any filtration, right? Yeah.
This maplet, so we don't have any active transformations, right? Expression is a passive transformation, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if a maplet, if you are using any active transformations within a maplet, right, then that maplet is an active transformation. Okay. So if you, because in this case we have an expression which is a passive, so these are like passive. So it just accepts, these transformations in maplet input and output, those are those transformations are acting as anchors. They accept and then they will pass the output. That's what they don't do anything. So obviously this maplet is an passive maplet, right?
Yeah.
So that is how you have to use. Generally, you will in projects, right? You will be creating reusable maplets. So if you want to reuse the same logic, in a multiple mapping, then they create this particular maplet and use the maplet across the mappings. Okay, that is how you have to. So any doubts here?
No.
Okay. What else I can say? Yeah. Other thing is, within a mapping, we are seeing, right? So this is a overview window. So in this overview window, you can see what is the flow and all, and you can do arrange all. Right? This is one flow. Okay, this is one flow. This is one target load plan, we can say. So something like this, you can have another flow also. So I can, okay, let me open a different mapping. Okay. So I am doing copy of this particular flow and then paste, save, arrange all. Now if you look at within a mapping, you have two different flows, and each flow is loading into multiple different targets, correct? So using this we will say it as an overview window. So using this, you can easily navigate within the mapping and browse and see the mapping in a very fast manner. So generally, if you have any 30 transformations or 40 transformations within a mapping, so you can use this particular overview window to easily browse within the mapping. You see here there are two different flows. You have one source qualifier and one source qualifier. This source qualifier is getting loaded into 3 different targets, and this is loading into one different target. So you can set, right? So you should know, you should set the dependency, right? Which flow you want to execute first and which flow you want to execute last. So you go to mappings and go to target load plan. So here in this SQ_EMP, SQ_shortcut_EMP1. So this is the one which is going to execute first, and this is the one which is going to execute last. So if you want to change the order, you select this or select this and then click down. So similarly, right, you can have multiple load plans, right? So this is one load plan. So that's the reason why we have given it as target load plan. So you can have n number of load plans, but generally Informatica does not suggest you to have more than one, or maybe you can have at least maximum of 2, because it will become difficult to keep track of the error tracking and all those things. Okay. So you cannot properly control. Okay, so that is what the generally Informatica, but generally people use it. So within the same mapping, you can have multiple flows because you cannot achieve everything in a single target load plan. Okay, so that is one thing. Okay, now suppose for this particular workflow, SCD type 2, right? You need to find out the dependent objects of all. So that means you just have the workflow name, and if you want to find out the mapping or sources, targets, or reusable objects that this workflow is dependent on. So how will you do that? So generally you right click on the particular workflow, go to dependencies, and see here these are all the object types. If you select all these objects types, right, and then click OK, so it will give you all the objects this workflow is related to. So these are all the objects. Okay, so here these are all the transformations you have within a mapping. So this is the mapping session name. So this is the mapping name. So, and within this mapping, these are all the different transformations this particular workflow is referring. So that likewise, because these option, right, dependencies and all, these are useful when you want to do any debug or when you want to find out all the dependent objects, something like that. And what else I can say? And one more thing is debugger here. If you look at the debugger here, okay, so one way of debugging the mappings is what? How will you do the debug, or how will you find out where the issue is if you have any errors?
Session log.
Session log, and you will keep the verbose data, right?
Yeah.
If there is any particular problem in a particular transformation, for that particular transformation, you will keep the verbose data and then find out what is the input record and what is the output record, or that how the variable ports are evaluating in between. All those things you can see it in the session log. So the other way is you can use the debugger. So you go to mapping. So before using a debugger, right? So you need to set some breakpoints. So right click here and then edit breakpoints. Add, click OK, and also you can click edit breakpoints, add. So you keep this maplet expression transformation. In the maplet you are adding a particular expression for finding out. So why do we need to keep these breakpoints is, so whenever you execute the debugger, right, so whenever it will show you the flow. So it read first record, so it is going to this expression, and what record that was passed to this expression, that you can see it. And then after this expression, what is the record that was passed to the maplet, and in the maplet you can see what is the record that expression is receiving. Also it will show you the flow of execution, and you can, if you want, you can modify or manipulate the values also. So let's see that. So go to mappings menu, debugger, start debugger. Next. So here you can create a debugging session instance. So if you want, you can use an existing session which was already created. So now I am going to create a debugging. So it will create the debugging session on its own for a temporary purpose. And it is asking to give the connection information. So all this connection information is proper. DB connection relational. Next. Next. So it discards data for the target table, can either be discarded or written to the target location. If data is discarded, you can still view the view. So once the data is loaded, right, it is asking whether you want to discard it from the target table or not. Click OK. See here, the integration service is sending to the request has been sent to the integration service. So it starts the debugging session. So how it will start is, internally it will prepare a workflow, it will create a session, temporary purpose, and then it will start the debugger. So it's a different, within the designer, it's a different tool actually. Debugger startup not successful. I think there is an issue. So generally the problem is, right, if you are working in a real environment also, debugger is not that user friendly actually. There are a lot of issues you will get. Whenever you are working, right, you will be working on a VPN or a virtual network. So you will be accessing the Informatica software through VPN, and then you will be using it. So generally if you are accessing through designer and all through VPN, virtual network or SharePoint portal, so debugger will not work generally. It won't support. So I think in our case also there is some issue with the software which we are using. So that's the reason why it's not getting started. Because we are using a trial version, right? Okay. Trial version means that it's a train.
So how, like, if any issue comes, like then and if we have to monitor step by step, like how it is going, then what normally we do?
So can you repeat?
Like normally, like if any issue comes, like, and we have to, you know, do some kind of analysis, like how it is going step by step. So
issue means which issue, or where the issue is?
No, anyway, like we have to check this flow, how it is going in the expression transformation, and like step by step, if we have to check that. So do we need to use only
in this case, in our case, since it is a trial version, so that's the reason why then we may not have that feature enabled or something. There is a problem. So generally it will show you. So generally you start the debugger, right? It will give you some windows here, source and target and transformation instances and all. And then you do next instance. So if you click next, it will read the record from the source qualifier. So let me go through the help. Maybe you can see some windows.
So normally the debugger must be working, right, in the real.
Sorry, Pankaj.
So normally that debugger must be working, right?
Generally debugger must be working. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is how it looks like. Okay, so this is the source qualifier, target instances, the debugger tool. It will look like this. So you see here the flow.
Yeah.
So these are the red symbols, means these are all the breakpoints. So if you have a breakpoint here, so what it will do is it will stop. Once the record was received to this particular aggregator transformation, it will stop and then it will display here in the instances.
Okay. Also, we can see the values also, right? Yeah. Like what is
Sorry?
the value? Also, we can see the values, right?
Yeah, we can see the values. That's what here,
Yeah.
right? You can see here. See here ports and all. What is the values here?
Right. Yeah, it's showing values there.
So you just if you go through the help, right? Maybe it's just you can start the debugger and then click next instances and all. You will understand. It's just trial and error. If you do for once, twice, then you can understand.
Okay.
One more thing is, it's a problem is if you go for a debugger, right? So if you are having a huge number of records, you cannot, because you need to keep on click next for each and every record. Right? So you can use a debugger only if you have like a couple of records or 10 records, something like that in a source.
Okay. And is it allowing to change the values while doing the debugging?
Yeah, it will allow you, I think. Yeah, debugger will allow you. I think in an expression, or you can also evaluate an expression and see modify the formula and then see what value you are getting, something like that you can do.
Okay.
Don't know the problem, why the problem is, what the problem is, but it's not working. Use an existing session instance. Let's use this. I think there's something wrong. Actually, it should show all the breakpoints whenever we are. It's not.
Okay, that's fine. Then we can also do that. We'll do some practice.
Yeah.
See if it is working.
There is some problem. See here, it's address already in use. Something like that is giving. So there's some problem.
Okay.